Historical Happy Hour, the podcast that explores new and exciting historical fiction novels. I'm your host, Jane Healy, and in today's episode, we welcome internationally best-selling author Tracey Enerson Wood to discuss her latest novel, Katharine, the Wright Sister. Hold it up because beautiful cover. Welcome, Tracey. Thank you for doing this.
Oh, thank you, Jane. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited.
Me too. So I'm going to do a quick bio on you, and then we can jump right in. And every week I always ask, like, tell me in the chat, everybody, where you're from and what books you're reading right now. Thank you for coming tonight. Tracey Enerson Wood is a retired registered nurse and published playwright whose family is steeped in military tradition. She's the national and international best-selling author of The Engineer's Wife, The War Nurse, and The President's Wife. She is also the co-author of the nonfiction book Life Hacks for Military Spouses. So I think this is perfect to have you on Veterans Day week. Thank you. She lives in Tampa, Florida. And thank you so much again for being on.
Oh, thrilled to be here.
So I have a special place in my heart for books that are about lesser known women in history. And Katharine Wright certainly fits the bill. So talk about the premise of this novel and how you decided to write about the Wright brothers' sister Katharine, who is not well known.
And she isn't. And actually, it's my passion to find amazing women in history. And so far, I've stuck to American women, but amazing women who have been sort of behind the scenes, but without whom big things would not have happened. Women who basically changed history, but we don't know their story. So I like to discover them and expose their story, and we can learn so much from them and so much more about history and understanding things if we understand those roles. And it's also important to me not only to recognize these women that we should know about, but we don't, but it's a reflection on all women and all the roles that we play every day, keeping things together, keeping families running, having jobs outside the home on their own. So it's a story, and the stories I write are basically for all women, all the people behind the scenes that make things happen.
Excellent. Yes. So I've looked into your backlist too. So you really you've built a career on this, which is amazing. And so I feel like we're in elementary school, we're taught about Wilbur and Orville Wright, the Wright brothers, the legend of them. But you go into you really do a deep dive into their story and focus on not only them, but on Katharine, their sister. I mean, I didn't even know that they had a sister. I didn't know that they had two other brothers. So talk about the research for this book. I mean, you go really into the descriptions of the flying machines and the technical aspects, which I thought was fascinating. What was the research like, and did anything surprise you?
Oh, I love research. It's one of my absolute favorite things because I'm just learning so much. And at the time I'm doing the research, whether it's, sitting in a library or reading many books I buy, or actually boots on the ground, I'm learning things and I'm putting the story together in my head as I'm learning what happened in history, all the different roles of the characters in real life. I'm imagining them in scenes and seeing how that will become a novel. Because a novel, of course, is very different from nonfiction stories that we've learned in school. Like you mentioned, everybody's heard of Orville and Wilbur Wright, but the things we don't learn in school are just as fascinating and perhaps even more important. So that's why I do like to do a deep dive, as you call it, into the story, so we can understand what they went through. I mean, the challenges were enormous, the bravery that they had, risking their lives, risking, their livelihoods as well, to do something that we so take for granted now. I mean, we get on a plane, we don't think much about how it got to be that way. So I like to explore those things so I can learn, and hopefully my readers will enjoy and learn as well.
Definitely. So talk about Katharine Wright. Again, no one's really heard of her, but she was very much kind of the third, like the silent partner in the relation, of the three siblings. And how did you learn about her? How did you develop her voice as a character? I'm really interested because she's
Yeah,
fascinating.
yeah, funny thing is, I hadn't heard of her either, and I actually thought I knew quite a bit about the history of aviation because Dayton actually is my husband's hometown, and it kind of became my hometown as we were military moving around. That was the stable home that my kids have because that's where grandma and grandpa were. So I spent a lot of time there, and my family is just steeped in aviation history as well. So we would go to the aviation museums and all the museums. So I kind of thought I knew, quite a bit about him, but I didn't know about Katharine. And it actually was my son-in-law who was just kind of flipping through Facebook one day, and I was just kind of thinking about, who I was going to write about next. And he came across a small article about Katharine and said how she had, helped the brothers and that she was a suffragette, which some of my previous characters were also suffragettes, so he knew I was interested in that, and that I liked the time frame of the teens and 20s. But also, he knew, of course, about our family's history with Dayton. And so he told me about her, and then it was just off to the races. I had to know everything about her, and I was just, I guess, the most surprising thing to answer that question was how much she did. It wasn't just a matter of well, of course, someone had to be running the bicycle shop and keeping the family solvent because they weren't borrowing money and they didn't have government backing or anything like that. They did it out of their own funds. So not only was she running the bicycle shop and working as a teacher to support the family financially, but she was one of the main resources for all the kind of special things they needed. They needed special fabric and they needed special wood and they needed fittings and just all kinds of things that she was the one who went out there and found many of these things. She was also the one to push them when they were crashing and failing and failing and failing and didn't have the money. And there were so many times that they could have given up. And she just didn't let them. She kept them going and kept them going on the family, the project basically, and was really the light under their feet. Not only that, but then after the big invention, we've all heard of Kitty Hawk and the first manned powered flight. But what happened after that is another whole story, which of course is a big chunk of the book as well, because now they had to market this invention. First, they had to convince people to buy it because it hadn't been done before, and a lot of things had crashed and people had died, and there was a lot of convincing to do. And the convincing actually happened in Europe before it happened in the U.S. And it was Katharine who did that because Katharine spoke multiple languages, French and Spanish, and she had zero reservation about talking to kings and queens and princes and captains of industry, where Orville and Wilbur Wright, historians say if they were alive today, they would probably be considered on the spectrum. So that kind of gives you an idea of their
Yes.
personalities. So that part was not within them at all to do. And so that was another big part of what she did, not only getting it invented, but then marketing it to other countries, which of course was very fortunate because the Allies had the airplane before the Central Powers did, due to her and the brothers' work on the airplane, which turned the tide of World War One. So historically, it's actually very important.
Amazing. Yeah, and I love the chapters in Europe and how unafraid and bold she was, talking to world leaders. And I didn't think about the fact that or I mean Orville as particularly was very socially awkward, but now thinking back and reading the book, I'm like, yeah, that makes sense why and they never married, the two brothers, and they were very socially awkward and so interesting. And really just dedicated their life to their work. I think,
Yeah.
as well as Catherine did as well. One thing, as I was reading it, she nobody knows about her. She's this hidden woman in history. She was actually more recognized in Europe, it seems, than here. She received the French Legion of Honor along with the brothers, which was like the highest honor. Besides being a woman, why do you think she's been left out of the narrative?
I think it speaks to the age where they where women were very much expected to stay home and raise families and not work outside, and actually many jobs of course were closed off to them. Um, but she and women were, there were prescribed roles for them. One of them, of course, they could be a teacher, which Katharine was. Well, women of that time, if they were a teacher, once they married, they had to leave their job.
Mhm.
So there was that whole almost stigma to it, especially in this country. So I think she always stayed on the quiet time just because of the mores of the day. And I also believe that I think her not marrying for until very much later in life kind of crept up on her, and I kind of got that from most of her letters and her writings. I don't think she thought that being a Wright sister was the whole thing of her life. I think she thought she would have a traditional life, and it just sort of year after year didn't happen. So I don't think she was ever of the mind to develop, her own persona, her own fame. That I don't think was. I just don't think it was important to her.
Interesting. Yeah, that's true. And, I kept thinking about it too, because this was, I mean, women couldn't even vote at this time. So that,
All
yeah, in
right.
terms of,
And it was more important that she did work on the suffrage movement, and she
mhm.
actually led, and in the book led um, a, a parade, and she did work and go to meetings as she could. She didn't, have that much time uh, until almost around 1915 or so to work on it, and then that only left 4 years. But she did work on it, and it was important for her to women get the vote. But I don't think she saw herself as like a chairman of that movement. She was sort of just one of the players.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, she lived many lives.
Yes, she did.
Really. So I want to talk about the structure of the story because it's focused on Catherine, but it's told from third person perspective, alternating chapters between Catherine, Orville, and Wilbur. And why did you decide to write it that way? And was that always the plan?
Yeah, and it's actually written in first person
Oh,
in
first
the
person. I'm
story.
sorry.
So no,
I
no,
made the
okay.
wrong note.
That's all right. I actually didn't start out that way. My previous books were written in first person, one point of view, the point of view of the protagonist, the woman that the book was about. But very early on, I realized that I was learning so much more about Catherine and her real feelings and her dedication, not from her own writings and her own letters, but from what her father had written in his many, many letters back home, from what Wilbur had and Orville had written about her, and their points of views, and coming out of their mouths how important she was, I thought was much more powerful than anything she would say about herself. And she wouldn't say it about herself. So pretty early on, I realized I wanted those voices because that was the truth. And the other reason was sort of a learning curve for me, having written other books where I had scenes because it's biographical historical fiction, and I try to stick to the facts as they happen as closely as possible. And there's many important scenes, especially like building the Brooklyn Bridge. There were just scenes where Emily was not involved, so I had to do dramatic workarounds in dialogue or whatever the device was to bring those scenes to life. Well, that's actually really hard. And it's actually much simpler to see a scene from the eyes of the character that's there on the ground. So that was another reason that so many things happened that we know Catherine wasn't there. She wasn't at Kitty Hawk. She was home working.
Yeah.
So I thought, I don't want to have to do this through news clippings or stuff. I want boots on the ground. I just thought we'd feel so much closer to the characters if they could explain it from their own eyes. So that's when I decided, no, it's going to be Orville. And then there was, I don't want to go into what happened with Orville and Catherine because that's too much of a giveaway, there, spoiler. But I thought it was really important to get into his head.
Interesting. Yeah. And now did you find this difficult or freeing to write this way from different perspectives?
At first, it was a little bit because I was worried about, balancing it and when do how I didn't want to make it awkward. The transitions awkward. I wanted them to really flow very naturally, so you didn't really, it wasn't jarring. So I was,
Mhm.
a little worried about that. But really, as I was writing it, it flowed so beautifully. And I didn't think, okay, I did Orville, now I'm going to do Wilbur, now I'm going to do Katharine, now it's all. I didn't do it that way at all. I looked at, what needs to happen next in the story, moving the story forward, and who is the best character to tell whatever happened at this point. And that's how it flowed. If it was, Wilbur was the person who had the closest relationship to the action, then it was Wilbur. And it wasn't, maybe I have to go back and look to see if I actually alternated evenly. I don't think I did. So that was actually really, really freeing and fun.
Yeah, yeah. And I liked I think for readers now too, you have like some short punchy chapters in there, like just a couple
Yeah,
pages, which I think mixes things up for readers and the way that people's concentration are now. Like I like that. I
yeah.
mean,
And
that
don't
was
forget about me. I'm still here.
yeah, exactly. That was good. I like that format a lot. You brought this up, and this was one of my questions too. So you've written biographical historical fiction before. What are the unique challenges of writing about a real person in history? I've only done it once. I found it incredibly challenging. Um, what are the challenges as opposed to writing a character inspired by a real person?
Well, as you know, in all historical fiction, readers have expectations of certain things to be true and not true. And of course, you're making up parts too. But that's a huge gray area, right? I mean, what parts are you not so much allowed to, but more expected to stick to the truth, and what parts can you elaborate or fictionalize? And that's always a tightrope in historical fiction. In biographical historical fiction, you have a higher bar to reach as
Hmm.
far as what you can fictionalize. I think the expectations, rightly so, with the reader are that you're as close to history as you can be. And of course, there's always things that are not documented and not really known. And actually, that's what I consider my playground. And the whole reason really for historical fiction is to fill in the blanks that history doesn't. I don't write something that we know didn't happen. I mean, sometimes I have to move timelines around a little bit just for dramatic effect, but then, I own up to it at the end. But basically, I have a theory that what I write is either true and it happened and it's documented, or it could be true.
Hmm.
If I make up something, it's a scene, it's because we don't know exactly what happened, and I'm dramatizing it, but in a way that it actually could happen. So I guess, I think that's the challenge in historical fiction is always that tightrope, and um making it believable. Um and that, it's believable because it all could be true.
Yes, yeah, excellent. Yeah, I talk about this with every writer that comes on, and I think it's all about like if it didn't happen, does it feel authentic? Could it have happened?
Yeah,
Yeah.
authentic.
So
Oh, that's a good word. I like that.
yeah, yeah.
Authentic. Does it feel
Organic or
authentic?
authentic to the story.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. And still, you don't want to take away from the historic record. That's
Right.
important. But, the historic record for something like this, there's actually a lot of historic record because they took many, many, many notes, and, but no historical fiction reader, wants to do that. So the other challenge is, what of all this factual stuff, if there's a lot. I mean, if you're talking about ancient civilizations, you don't have this problem. But with more near historical fiction, you have to winnow away and find the parts that fit with your dramatic arc. And
Mhm.
that's also a challenge because, yeah, I'm sure you, as a historical fiction writer yourself, you understand the temptation to put in beautiful little gems that you've polished and you love, and it's so interesting, and you're kind of proud you found this little gem. But if it doesn't fit in the story, and it doesn't fit with the characters, and it doesn't move the story forward, you have to, the old kill your darlings kind of thing. So that's a challenge. But I've learned, since this is my fourth biographical novel, I know that pit, and sometimes I'll go ahead and write it anyway, knowing that it's probably not going to fit, because still you're learning. Even as you're writing this, you're learning. There's probably a little tweak of this that needs to, I wrote 50 pages, but, there's probably half a paragraph that actually will fit in there. So another challenge
Right.
for us.
That is such a learning curve, I think. My first book, I
Mhm.
had so many info dumps because I was like so
Yeah.
proud of the research. And I'm like,
Oh, but this is so interesting.
my early readers would be like, no one cares.
Yeah, no, I
You
get
know?
it.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Was there anything in the research that you wanted to fit into this book that you just couldn't get in there because you just ran out of space?
There was a lot more about Dayton. I would have liked it. you know, it's obviously an important setting, and I use lots of historical references and real buildings and things I knew at the time. But there's a whole lot more about Dayton I would have loved to put in there, but just really didn't fit in the book. There was a lot more technical things about the invention of the airplane, which I'm kind of a geek there. But in my mind, unless the reader needs to understand a certain thing, they need to understand like the concept of an aileron, even if we don't mention the word really. They need because they got to understand why these things keep crashing or what the challenge is. So unless it's something the readers need to know, you don't have any business going on and talking about it. So yeah, I would have liked to put in more fun things about airplanes, more things about Dayton. I would have liked to put more about the suffrage movement at the time, because I think it's really important even today, but it didn't fit with. I mean, it's already a pretty darn big story. So those were some things when I write the
Yeah,
second book about the Wright Sister.
there you go. I have some writing questions now, and I just want to remind everyone to put questions in the chat or the Q&A for after I finish my questions with Tracey. How, actually, we actually just covered this about balancing fact versus fiction. So I'm going to move on to the next one. What's your process? Are you a plotter? Do you plot things out, or do you write by the seat of your pants? What's your writing process like?
I think probably this is pretty common with biographical historical fiction. We have kind of a plan already because we're working on history. So almost by default, because of what I'm writing, I'm pretty much a plotter. Some things, character development tends to be a little bit more a seat of the pants, because I'm sort of learning the characters and they're sort of teaching me about themselves as they're developing, and through my research I kind of have an idea of what they were like, but the character really develops and deepens as I'm writing. But the the, the dramatic arc is pretty much is all plotted out.
Yeah, that's kind of my process too. For the, I think especially with biographical fiction, you have a person's life and timeline. You can't really deviate from
Yeah,
that.
right,
So,
right.
um, was there one book that you read growing up that you just adored and was part of the reason you wanted to write novels? Was there one or more books that you just, were close to your heart?
So funny. There's several. I mean, I love, like, I love Thompson. This will really date me, but I love the Nancy Drew books. Funny because I'm not a mystery reader much now, but those really got me into reading. And there was a book. It was, again, it's not a genre I read much, but it was called Half Magic, and it was a
Oh
fantasy.
yeah, I remember that.
And remember, and it was just I just so amazingly written that I probably read it 3 times, and
Mhm.
that was a book that really opened up. Like, wow, I mean, reading is a lot of fun, and so yeah, those are kind of the ones that come to mind. Or is the series, Nancy Drew and that kind of thing, and and then later on, I really got into dystopians like George Orwell and that kind of thing. That would have been more like high school. But actually, my very first favorite books were Dr. Seuss because they were so
Ah,
darn funny. I still
so
love
good.
Dr. Seuss. They're so good.
Classic.
They're just classic. They're telling a story, giving morals or whatever, but in such a fun way.
Yes,
I love that. I think I developed my sense of humor through Dr. Seuss.
excellent. I know we have some aspiring authors in the audience always, and this is your fourth novel. You've also published nonfiction. What's the best advice you can give about writing and getting published?
Oh, find your tribe. That's
Mm,
really important. Share your work with others. Get into a reading group, online or in person, whatever floats your boat. But read other people's pages as they're writing them and critique them and learn from them. You'll learn more from reading other people, trust me, than you
Mm,
will having them. Everybody goes like, here's my pages, read them and give me feedback. But that's really a small part of it. You really, really, really need to have people read your pages and give you feedback early on. It's really critical. Do not go out there and start sending querying agents and sending out your work unless you've had plenty of eyes on it. And not, I'm not talking about your mom. You need to have critical eyes on it. And other writers are just a gold mine because they're trying to do the same thing and they need your help too. So that's my biggest advice.
that is excellent advice. Finding your people. I had a great writers group when I was first starting out that I'm still close friends with. And it's amazing how you think something's good and ready to go, and then you get feedback and you're like, oh, I guess it really
Yeah.
is not. Yeah. So
Yeah, it's shocking, right? It's shocking, really. I'm like, oh my God. Sometimes like I can't wait to have my group read this. It's the best thing I've written, and I'm
it's
so amazed
perfect.
with myself. And usually they would like it, but they're like, "What did you think about?" Or I didn't understand this. I'm like, "What do you mean
Mm,
you didn't understand it?" So you can't see the problems in your own writing, especially after you've done it a while. It's not that I now see it, it's now I've got all their voices in my head. And I
hmm.
know when I write something, well, I know that Julie's going to say that, that's not written right, or use that word to me. I mean, there's just so many things, and those people travel with you. At least me, they're still in my head, and I still send it out. Of course, I have my agent and my editor, but I have several very trusted beta readers that I still send it, even though I just published my sixth book. But you need those voices because you cannot know how your words impact other minds. You think you can,
Yep.
and you can't.
Absolutely true. So true. I wanted people, Christine Mott and Courtney Rogers are in here, and so many other lovely longtime listeners and attendees.
Hi.
Can we talk about this gorgeous cover? Because Christine just commented on it, and your covers, covers in terms of your
And I'm
brand,
wearing the colors.
sweet, lovely. So, do you have much say in cover design? Because the colors are just amazing. Everything about it.
They are beautiful. I love it. I get a little bit of say. I mean, I don't. I wish I had those talents. I don't have the talents to design the covers like that. They always come up with these amazing things. But I do get no veto power or the opportunity to tweak things. And that's really what this cover just completely blew me away. The colors surprised me. I love them, but I tweak them a little bit. For example, the flyer that's in the upper right corner, right by Katharine's hat there, it was much smaller when I saw the first proof. And I actually, because I live in Florida, I actually thought it was a mosquito, and I like kind of swatted, like, oh, what's that? And then I was, oh my gosh, that's the flyer. And so I made them make that quite a bit bigger because I figured, it's a pretty big feature. So I did that. I insisted the all my protagonists, well, except for the first one because it wasn't that smart. My first book, they have a flower that's associated with them, which is historically based. And in this case, it's wildflower. So I make sure the flowers are kind of a little bigger and bolder maybe than other people would do it, just because that's kind of my thing. They all have a flower, and there's a reason why. And you have to read almost through the whole book to find out why wildflowers are Katharine's flower. So I love that. So I changed or tweaked that a little bit. The other thing I tweak a little bit is you see the font of the title there, that beautiful golden yellow color. Well, in the first proof, it was really kind of a lemony yellow. And I felt it didn't go well with the beautiful, beautiful sunset colors. And so we kind of went back and I'm very, very color sensitive. I was an interior designer for a short amount of time. So I'm really very conscious of that. And I just kind of tweaked like, no, 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 until they finally hit just the right shade of golden and yellow. And then it was perfect. I might add something that happened in one of my events recently. I had talked to the group about the scene early in the book where Orville and Katharine are in his bedroom, and then he redoes her bedroom in this beautiful golden color, and it's a big scene. And I explained to the group, I won't go into that now, but why this scene happened the way it was, because I was in that bedroom, I on my research, and I explained why it was so important to me. And one of the people in the audience said, "Do you?" And then I was telling them about the same thing I just told you about the covers. Like, were you so conscious of that golden color because of that scene? in the bedroom, and the golden color of the wallpaper. And I'm like, I I had never put that together. So
Wow.
maybe that's why. But like, thank you, that person in where was it? It was in Massachusetts.
Oh,
It was in Plymouth, Massachusetts, where that
oh,
happened. So thank you, dear sweet person in Plymouth, Massachusetts, because I'd never put that together.
oh, wow. That's right down. I'm in Melrose. I'm north of northern Mass, a little bit. So
Oh,
it's
okay,
pretty close to me,
yeah,
like an hour.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
um, are you ready to share what you're working on now?
I don't have a protagonist yet. What I have so far is an age I would like to write about. I've been sort of slowly working my way through history. The Engineer's Wife starts Civil War era, and the Catherine's Wright story takes us up to the end of the Roaring Twenties, which is fun to write about. So you would think naturally, kind of the 30s and the Depression is the next big chunk of time. And I don't want to write about that. Kristen Hanna wrote a great book, The Four Winds. Read that.
Mm,
I just it's not it just doesn't, it has to really grab me. And then the next big group of time would be World War II, and I'm going to shy away from that, not because it's not fascinating and that there's a lot of stories there are, but there's so many wonderful stories already, and the women's stories are being told, and I just want to move on, and I'm going to write about the fabulous 50s and the huge dichotomy between women's expectations and women's roles and this perfect society that we are supposed to be post World War II. And I think it's a really, really challenging time because the social things are changing so much. And and then leading up into the early 60s, prior to 1963, which I think many, 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 the innocence of our country, I think, was lost. So I want to write about the 50s and early 60s, and I may stay in aviation and write about some of the women who were first in the astronaut program and then were kicked out because they're basically women. Or I may do like a Mad Men kind of thing because I'm fascinated with Mad Men, but Mad Women, some
mhm.
women in power in advertising or in business, and I think that would be really juicy.
Yes.
And really, I just want to write about free martini lunches and smoking, all the things that I never got to do that were okay back then. I just
Right.
so yeah, so I don't know who, I've got to kind of narrow down, and I'm kind of looking for my next protagonist, but I haven't quite decided yet. I'm
Oh,
researching.
exciting. That's
It
very
is.
exciting. And I mean, all juicy stuff. I love that. Yeah, I love Mad Men too. So I
Matt,
just sort of,
Matt,
yeah,
well, I have to tell you, my obsession with Mad Men is probably 75% due to Don Draper, John Hamm. Yeah, that's it.
yeah,
That's why I watched the whole series three times.
yeah.
But no, I just think it'll be a lot of fun to
So
write
fun.
about mad women.
So fun. Yes. Um, so how I should mention in the back of the book you have some great book club questions. How can readers best stay in touch with you, and do you Zoom with book clubs and things like that?
Yeah, I do. Mostly, I go through Zoom through Adventures by the Book. They're
Okay.
a wonderful organization, and you
Yep.
can actually write to me, as well. If you go to my website, TraceyEnersonWood.com, there's a contact page there, or also my direct email, and I do as much as possible answer all emails, and you can contact me and give me details if you'd like to do a book club, but it's probably actually easier for you just go through Adventures by the Book, and they will schedule it because they kind of already know my schedule and parameters and all that good stuff, and it just saves everybody time. But either way, yes, I will zoom into book clubs. I love to do events. I've pretty much done with my big launch tour, but I'm doing events here and there, wherever. I do love to travel. So and I love for readers to write to me, if if they're writing, they're aspiring writers, aspiring novels. I love to hear from them, and I'm always happy to answer a question as I can. I love hear from them. That's really, it's the best part, right?
But it is. It's so great. I love it too.
Mhm.
Yeah, Courtney Rogers asked, will you be back in Massachusetts at anytime soon for book tour?
Yeah. Oh, not anytime soon. It will probably not be till maybe springtime. I think I'm going up there. I have yeah, it's not Massachusetts. But yeah, I was in Plymouth, I was in Brewster, I was in
Uh,
Marblehead.
Oh,
I
geez, that's
love
right
that.
near
Yeah.
me. I
Oh,
didn't
really? Yeah. Oh,
know.
Marble Lake. Well, it's great. You didn't know. Oh, it's wonderful. I had a great time there. I have a sister lives upstate, well, not way upstate, but what's considered upstate New York. And so I usually go see her twice a year, and I'll probably do some events. I think it'd probably be springtime, I think.
Nice, nice.
Mhm.
And let me see. We have a couple
Or
questions.
send me an offer I can't refuse, and I'll come anytime.
There you go. Christine Mott asks if you could meet any of the women you have written about, which one would you want to meet? I have loved all of them and appreciate your research.
Oh,
It's a
that's
great question.
amazing. It is a good question. I think I think I'd want to meet the one I'm most scared of. And that would be Julia Stimson, the war nurse, because I was a nurse, registered nurse for 25 years. And I know how powerful she was, powerfully physically, emotionally, psychologically. And I just knew a lot of nurses like that kind of used to scare me because they were just so strong and powerful. But I'd love to meet her because she was another unsung heroine. I mean, she basically almost single-handedly made nursing into the profession it is today. And yet, and we've never heard of her. So I'd really like to meet her. I'd like
Christine
to
says,
meet all of them.
yeah. Christine says I recommend that one to people all the time, which is
Oh,
lovely. So
good. Yes,
nice,
thank
Christine.
you. Thank
And
you.
one more question. Denise asks, do you have a favorite character of the characters you've written? Denise Ungarato asks.
I'd have to say it's probably P.T. Barnum because he
Uh,
was so much fun to write about, and just he had so many wonderful quotes already. I didn't use his own quotes, but just kind of the feeling, his sort of irreverence to things. And yeah, I mean, he was just actually a very deep thinker, strangely enough, but just a really out there personality. And such a great foil for both Emily and Washington. I so he was fun. There are so many great characters, but he was really fun to write.
good one. Good answer. Tracey, this was so delightful. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule and congratulations on the latest book and your career. I hope it
Thank you. Thank you.
soars. It
Yeah.
came out in
Yes, it's
September,
so beautiful.
everybody. It's
It
beautiful.
is.
Remember everyone to like or subscribe to the podcast on my YouTube channel. Next up, we have Kimberly Brock next week and Marjan Kamali's coming up and Amy Runyon. And then I'm going to do a year-end podcast to talk about my new novel, which is coming out in July, called The Women of Arlington Hall. But thank you everyone for coming tonight. And thank you again, Tracey, for your time. Have a great night, everyone.